Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about the biggest problems that we run into with block type training instead of concurrent type periodization. And the biggest problem that we run into is that it simply doesn't work that well unless you're doing very, very high specificity. And what I mean is the whole concept of things like linear block periodization come from the Russian models and Eastern European models during the Cold War, to where you do very, very high specificity training. Right, you do just a handful of exercises, which we've discussed contributes to overuse tremendously, to get very strong at them, and you use the same exercises to build your strength and technique that you do to build your muscle mass for the most part, right? And they're simply changing rep ranges and things to do it. Now, the whole idea here, and it's funny because a lot of times people will say, well, Jason, you always mention the overuse issues. Couldn't we just do linear periodization and change exercises every 3 weeks? And the answer is no, because you lose the specificity, right? One of the reasons these models work is because you're doing the same exercises. In other words, if you're doing squat, bench, deadlift, and pull-ups, you get really good at squat, bench, deadlift, and pull-ups. Okay? You get very good at them. You run into overuse, but you do have a lot of movement pattern carryover. And so when you're running these blocks, you tend to do, maybe a 12 rep week, a 10 rep block, an 8 rep block, a 5 rep block, triples. Whatever it happens to be. It's probably closer to like 12, 8, 5, 3. Okay, so you run a 3 week block of those rep ranges. Of course, anyone who's done 12s on squats and deadlifts knows that that's pure hell. But I digress. Back over to the point. You get very, very good at these exercises. And the issue is that you do run into overuse. So the problem is when people say, well, can't we just change exercises, right? We can just change exercises and then the overuse goes away, but then you lose all the specificity, right? And there's no benefit to the blocks. That's something people forget. When you're building into the intensity of these blocks, there's no real benefit other than maybe the last weeks of it when you're going the heaviest to peak for your maxes, right? When you get to the threes. So if you tried to use a system like that, I mean, sure, you could do it and change exercises, but you're losing all the specificity of getting practice with those movements. And all the other stuff is really just there to give you hypertrophy, right? That's why you're doing all the volume. So just have hypertrophy blocks and volume blocks and accumulation blocks to do that. But they don't matter. The reason you change the rep ranges is to cut the overuse down so that you get hurt less. And novice lifters, it's not as big of a deal, but as you get more advanced, let's just say you just ran a simple 5x5 year round for the same things. Your overuse would accumulate quicker with the same exercises. So the whole idea is that it lets you get away with the high specificity for longer. Right, the injury rates still accumulate because basically your exercise variation is low, but because you're at least changing the rep ranges every block, overuse goes down. So if you were going to change exercises every block, it wouldn't make sense to change your rep ranges. You would just stick with a rep range and a volume that you could manage. Because there's nothing magical about any of this accumulation. It's just voodoo. It's voodoo. The problem that we have also is that you detrain the other elements. In other words, as you start going into the lower and lower reps and the volume goes down, your hypertrophy goes down. That's why these systems were designed around anabolic use, because usually towards the end you start adding more orals in, right? You start adding more stuff in. Because as doses go up, what happens? We get a larger hypertrophic response from the drugs. We need less from the training, then they can focus more on the neural and technical aspects. Okay? And it helps you start recovering from the volumes that you had done previously. As you trim the volumes down, the recovery goes up, even though the intensity is going up. The recovery is getting better, and then people are using stuff to help facilitate better recovery, better growth as you go into it. When you don't have that present, there's detraining. In other words, all the peak strength that you developed on the 3-rep block is gone by the time you start finishing the first 12-week block again. So you do say 3 weeks of 12 reps, 3 weeks of 8 reps, 3 weeks of 5, 3 weeks of 3, then you test max. Okay? So it's like a 13-week cycle, like 12 weeks and then a 1-week max week. And then, you compete every 12 weeks in theory. Well, you're detraining all those elements. You're detraining those elements. So whatever performance elements you put in there, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks for them to detrain. So by the time you get 2 blocks away, you've lost whatever it is that you trained from the other ones. It's detraining. When we do conjugate type training or concurrent periodization specifically, conjugate's a form of that, what happens? Those elements don't detrain. Now people say, but you're not maximizing any of them. Yeah, we can, if you can balance the recovery and program it right. It's a little more complicated, but you can maximize them. You can get enough volume to maximize hypertrophy. You can still keep your 1 rep max strength, right? You can get these things. You can maintain your speed strength because we train all of them every single week. And then we avoid overuse and to some extent higher risks of overtraining because we're rotating exercises constantly. So therefore we get away from that. But as far as even the specificity goes, you don't have to lose the specificity for the main lifts either. And in theory, on a system like this, you could max every 3 to 4 weeks on your classic lifts if you really wanted to. And then maintain that specificity, couldn't you? Right? You could absolutely do that. And maintain that peak strength on those lifts if you were worried about them. So that's viable. That's an option. It can be done. So that's the thing to keep in mind, is that when we go to a concurrent type periodization, we don't detrain the previous blocks. We maintain those performance elements and improve them in theory year round, assuming food, recovery, everything are on point. We improve those elements throughout the year without them detraining. So therefore we are pretty close to our peak most of the time. And it's very, very easy for us to be competition ready at any given time also. And for just anything, if you just want to be strong, right? You like being able to lift heavy year round. The system works. And that's the whole idea behind it, right? And we don't have the same overuse problems. We don't have the detraining. So when people ask, what's some of the biggest differences, what's the problems, and why is at its most basic level concurrent periodization better? Well, that's why. Less overuse. Now granted, a little less specificity, but less overuse, and we don't detrain. We continually improve everything throughout the year because we train everything year round. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.